Hello, I am Luis Reyes, and welcome to the Midlife Crisis Reading Club. That would be my midlife crisis and not that of my guests. I just want to make that abundantly clear. In this podcast, I have somewhat casual conversations with people about books because it seems like you need to do a podcast to actually get people to discuss books with you. Or at least that's what I found. Today, I discuss Percival Everett's James with my frequent interlocutors, Dr. W.J.T. Mitchell, retired art and English professor from the University of Chicago, and Dr. Shlomo Sher, professor of philosophy at Cal State University Fullerton, as well as other halls of academia. I do not have a PhD, but my wife does. Does that count? James has been described to me as a retelling of Huckleberry Finn from Jim's perspective. But I found that it wasn't so much a retelling as it is a response to the thematic world of Huckleberry Finn. As the book moves forward, it unmoors itself from Twain's narrative entirely, taking Jim or James into an entirely different story, one that reimagines him as a hero. Now, we are three aging white men talking about a book about Black identity, so if we misstep in this conversation, it is certainly not intentional. Also, let me know that we started to discuss the book before recording, and so we do make allusions to things that came up in that pre-pod conversation. And before even delving into James, the three of us talk about what we have been reading currently on our own and what we could potentially read for future episodes, particularly Emile Zola. It's a little appetizer before the main, so, hope you enjoy it. And I just want to say, I am relatively new to hosting, and I am always trying to get better at guiding these conversations. So of course, your feedback in the comments is always greatly appreciated. Whether laudatory or devastating, go for it. With all those intros and caveats behind us, let's get into James by Percival Everett. I think part of it is that you guys are doing it to humor me, and I appreciate it.
Yes, we're humoring you.
Good.
And you're humoring me. And we're all humoring each other, okay?
Well, I did read Lord Jim on your recommendation. I'm loving it. I would love to dive into that. And also, I would love to bring into that discussion Heart of Darkness. I've been rereading it. I am reading right now L'Assommoir by Zola. And in it, you get introduced to Nana as a child. She's born within the context of that novel. And then also Claude, who ends up in the masterpiece, and Etienne, who ends up in Germinal. They're all brother and sister.
I just finished reading Germinal.
Oh my God. What do you think?
Oh, it was great. It was, though I have to say it was great, but it's interesting seeing the movie first.
Oh, interesting.
Because I saw the movie before reading the book. I wouldn't mind, if we do a second Zola now that I've read two more Zolas.
I am hoping we do a second, third, fourth, fifth Zola. I am all about Zola.
I am reading Engels' report on the condition of the working class in 1848.
Oh, how relevant to Zola.
Very relevant. When Zola's a young man and Engels is in correspondence with Marx, they wanted to answer the question, what is counter-revolution? The reason I'm reading it is I'm going to be part of a discussion at Columbia on Wednesday night. And they have an ongoing thing, which is basically rereading Marx now in our time. The whole theory of development, societies go through stages depending on modes of production. It feels so anachronistic. And to them too, because things are not going the way they're fucking supposed to go. It's all going backwards, and they don't have a name for fascism yet. Just because the progressive forces seem to be on the ascendance, don't take it for granted. Because look what's happening right now, all going backwards.
We're bringing it back to Germinal. Etienne is reading all of these texts, and I'm sure one of them is Engels.
Right. And Marx is fleeing to London,
Etienne is being introduced to these things as if he can turn into a revolutionary, and by the end of the book, he just sort of moves along this river, not really impacting anything with this new knowledge or even completely understanding it, because as you say, the forces aren't in place to resist a slip into fascism.
It's also, the forces of socialism and communism are somewhat delusional.
Lauren Berlant has a book called Cruel Optimism. Cruel optimism. I love the phrase. The other book I'm reading, I just finished Dr. No. I skipped the last two chapters because I wanted to see what the ending would be. I mean, how do you end a book about nothing?
Up at the top here, what kind of author is he? And I agree with you. Tom. I feel like there is kind of a one-trick pony type element to him. It's almost like he is very, very good about riffing off of pop culture and kind of creating these really interesting narratives. I guess one of the questions I want to try to pose today is he doing something deeper in James specifically? I think he is a comedian to a certain extent,
Yep.
but there's also a ferocity to his social criticism. He's obviously criticizing things that do warrant criticism. The
Right.
question is whether he's doing them in a dynamic way or an effective way.
Yeah.
I find myself laughing sometimes out of discomfort with his social criticism, which I guess is effective. But overall race relation themes, though blatant, are also indirect. Other social critics tackle it head on. Because he's using this farce, he doesn't tackle it head on. He sort of
True.
lets the farce kind of play out. This is not Django Unchained. This is not 12 Years a Slave. These are not things that are tackling the institution of slavery in a more dynamic way. So, my first question, does Everett have a unique voice then in that? Or, as Tom said, is he a one-trick pony? What do you think, Tom?
I think the words Tom used was a smartass, and I like that. You know, let me answer this before, like, the real brains, like, get into the conversation. I kind of agreed with okay, so I've read at this point, 4 books, right? And I
As
think it
as
might
have
be
I.
the same books we all have, right? I think they're the same ones. So,
Yeah.
Doctor No, Telephone, I'm Not Sidney Poitier, and James. And I think he has a distinct voice. In fact, I think he has a distinct voice that's so distinct, all his characters are extremely similar to one another. There's a point in I'm Not Sidney Poitier where Percival Everett, the professor, which I loved as a character in the book, and Ted Turner, who I also loved as a character in the book, when they're separate, I feel like they're essentially doing the same thing. They're both doing the Percival Everett, I'm going to be funny and do non sequiturs constantly.
Mhm.
And all he does is non sequiturs all the time. He's like the Family Guy or something, but he's a smartass. So they're really smart non
Right.
sequiturs that are meant to be funny. And I was like, oh my God, Ted Turner with his non sequiturs is about to talk to Professor Everett with his non sequiturs. And to me, it seemed like there were just two mouthpieces. This is like throughout all the books for the most part. But James feels a little different.
Yeah, it does, and that's why I want to get to that. To respond to you, Shlomo, you said that all his characters kind of sound the same. You mean him?
Yes.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
kind
They're
of
all
feel
him.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, in Erasure, which turned into American Fiction, again, it's almost literally him. And then all these other books, there's an aspect of him almost like he is his own mouthpiece in a way, right?
Uh-huh.
So
Right.
let's talk about James in this context because now, Tom, you read James first. So that was your first exposure to
Yeah.
Percival Everett. So you were like, what? I don't really quite get how he's coming to his conclusions, especially about John Locke. And Shulman and I both went, it's more of a farce than anything else. Look at his other books. But now I'm backpedaling. I don't know if James is as much of a farce as his other books, right? So, Tom, what did you now think of the other books, considering you read James first?
I like them less, although my favorite so far is Sidney Poitier, just because it made me laugh.
It's so funny.
I want to highlight one word you've used, farce. That's exactly the right genre. It's not quite comedy. It's the use of nonsense. And when I call him a one-trick pony, I think each novel I've read starts with one joke, and then it pumps it until you feel there's nothing left. You could not squeeze any more juice out of this lemon.
This is Dr. No. Like, Dr. No is like, okay, we're going to explore nothingness.
Yes, nothing will come of nothing. And the word not in I Am Not Sidney Poitier.
Right,
So
right.
playing with a single paradox, or negation of negation of negation, and you keep trying to add up how many negations. Well, 3 negations means nothing, but 4 negations is something. Something, nothing. He takes a verbal trick, and the idea of the name as meaning nothing or meaning everything or meaning something. That's the core of each of his writings. The places where I find him irritating is when I feel like he's making up shit, making up stories to keep you going forward. It's like a scaffolding, with Dr. No, bringing in one character after another and then gathering them all at the end. And But of course, I wanna ask what happened to Quincy, Massachusetts?
Nothing, Tom. That's what happened. Nothing.
Because there never was a Quincy, Massachusetts, even though everybody in this novel says, "What happened to Quincy?"
Going back to the word farce, I actually borrowed that. I mean, I had a sense of that's what it was, but I didn't have a word for it until I read Garrett Biggs's article in the Chicago Review of Books. He kind of hit it with that word farce,
Uh-huh.
right? He's writing these farces.
I started with Doctor No. My thoughts after Doctor No were pretty much almost exactly what Tom,
Yeah.
what
Me,
Tom
me
was
too.
thinking,
Yeah. I feel it's
you
all the
know.
one.
And I was really glad. I was like, how long can he take this one joke? And there's a few other things but mostly it's Doctor No seemed to be exactly what Tom is talking about. And I was very glad it was so short
Yeah.
because trying to do any more was really, really pushing it.
Mhm.
But when I look at, like, let's say Telephone, Lewis, you read Telephone.
I did.
Lewis, did you read the ending where he saves the migrant workers that are being held as slavery, or did you get a different ending?
I think I got a different ending, and now I can't even remember what the ending was. He published 3 different versions of the book, all with different endings. That's not indicated on the cover at all.
At all. So after I read it, I was like, "Oh, that's the," and I missed out because I didn't know there were 3 different endings, on the cleverness of the form itself, and I also think that Telephone really was not so funny, even though it still had
Yeah,
all those non sequiturs, and it was
true.
it was it was trying to go at something deeper, as it's dealing with this, professor, so I thought it really did have, some depth and looking at loss and stuff like that, and even, I'm not Sidney Poitier, so much of it is playing with the idea of not and what it does to a name, but also, I mean, there's real explorations of themes of identity, there and race. It's just that the cleverness of, like, putting all this in Sidney Poitier and mixing it all up together, I think is just primary over everything else.
Yeah, I don't think that he doesn't have the capacity for depth, and I'm not saying that he doesn't have the capacity to be an influential writer in the modern age, right? I guess what we're seeing, what we're witnessing here is we're witnessing the growth of a writer, right? And
Mm.
it could be that Erasure and the Trees, which I haven't read,
Mm.
probably also do tackle grander themes. Going into James then, I didn't feel as much of that farce, though to your point, Shlomo, I did feel that Jim is the voice of Percival Everett. That's him. And I feel like every other character is not a wholly formed character, including Huckleberry Finn.
But are any of the characters in his novels fully formed,
I think
other than the one who speaks for him?
that's actually a really good point.
To me, actually, James is not his voice exactly. Or, sorry, if his voice is essentially the smart-ass voice that constantly goes on tangents, and non sequiturs. And when I say read the 3 other books, I mean, he's written so many books that
Yeah,
I don't know if it's fair to just kind of
exactly.
go
Yeah. And
go
yep.
with this, but
I'm not reading anymore, Percy Everett, because life is short. For me, it's Zola and Engels and,
Conrad. Yeah.
Conrad, sure. But yeah, to me, James seems like a much more sincere exploration of the. I think he had this idea of it would be really interesting to write the story from Jim's perspective.
why this is feels more serious and a deviation, it's because, I give all the credit to Mark Twain.
Right.
Because Huckleberry is there, and he, appreciates Huck. He loves Twain, obviously. So Huckleberry comes off as a real character, a real foil, and the disappointment for me in the book is the disappearance of Huck
Yeah. We
from it,
lose him.
you know?
Yeah.
Now Huck lights out for the territory in the book, and you never hear from him again, and there's no explanation of where he went or even any curiosity about him. So, in a way, my discomfort with James is exactly that, that in all of his books, it's really about his cleverness. Look what a wise ass I am. I can channel a lot of stuff, numerology, topology, mathematics. Dr. No is filled with. I've been reading about the infinite quite a bit lately, and I may quote him on some of these passages about the infinitesimal and irrational numbers and so forth. He looks up a lot of shit and brings it in. But in Huck, he's dealing with a classic serious novel that he respects. And so Huck is there, but he's only there until then finally Everett himself takes over and shows off how incredibly learned he can be. I'm a USC professor.
Right. At some point, Huck is entwined with James's experience. And so, in a way, it's a conversation between Percival Everett and Twain at
And he
that
says
point.
so. We finally got to have our drink together or our dinner together.
Shlomo, going back to your comment about where the typical Everett appears, it's in The Conjuring of Voltaire and John Locke. That's the Percival Everett coming in and invading James's
Uh,
life as a character,
and
right?
that was to me the most absurd. I like the book. I like James. I thought it was. I don't know if I'd give it a national prize, but I thought it was a really cool book.
Yeah.
But I mean, every time he would bring up philosophers, Enlightenment era philosophers, especially, it just seems so contrived. I mean, unless what he wants to deal with is themes of freedom and ideas of freedom taken from a slave's perspective, and he's directly kind of exploring the idea. But to me, it didn't quite
I
work.
appreciate that if that's what he wanted to do, but is that what he did with those scenes?
It didn't
Yeah.
feel that way to me.
Well, but just ask yourself the fundamental question of narrative plausibility. How is it that James, who is capable of code switching, suddenly switches not just to code switching, but he becomes this, rigorous, learned philosopher. And how? Because he's been secretly reading all the books in the judge's library. Of course, he was never allowed into the fucking library. He wouldn't have come near it. He gives not one shit about narrative plausibility.
But again, is that a problem?
He just pushes it wherever he wants to go. This is where you part company with Mark Twain, a truly profound novelist who dared to put out in the open code switching in the real world and transform it into this luminous novel that people are still debating. I know I sound like I'm the old professor.
No, but I think it's a really good point because you're right. If you're going to tackle something like this, you're basically putting yourself into, I am going to now wrestle with Mark
Yeah.
Twain. Even if it's a friendly wrestling, it's a
Yeah.
wrestling with Mark Twain.
Now, when he sent the manuscript in, I would have said, I think readers are going to ask themselves what happened to Huck and what happened to Twain, who you wanted to have a conversation with and engage with, but you basically gave up and, showed off your command of enlightenment, moral philosophy.
I thought this was going to be just the story from James's perspective. And to me, that's engaging with the writer in a very direct way. But then there were things that were just different from the original story. Once you depart from the original story, or once you have really, I think the stories, for example, with the Duke and the King.
It's the relationship between them and the Good Duke and the King. That's where the threads start coming apart.
Yep.
Before then, there are sort of differences, but those differences are so minor. Like, he still finds Huck's dad dead in the house. He's still all those things that
Right.
appear in Huckleberry Finn appear there. It really is when the Duke and the King come into the picture that the threads really start.
That's always
becoming
been a complaint about Twain as well. When people criticize Huckleberry Finn, it's the Duke and the King, and what you might call the bamboozled blackface minstrelsy, the subplot. People who criticize Twain always point to that. He seized on the weakest thing in Twain's novel.
Or here's where I've heard the criticisms start happening with Twain. Obviously, the Duke and the King have their own kind of whatever that's
Mhm.
going on. But it's that third act when Tom Sawyer comes into the picture. That's where I see a lot of criticism happening. So I'm jumping a little bit ahead here because I wanted to talk about this later on. But in the article, the Garrett Biggs article that I sent you guys, he alludes to Toni Morrison talking about that last act of Huckleberry Finn, where Tom Sawyer, in his quest to have a bigger adventure, is almost cruel to Jim. Toni Morrison's going, wait a second, that third act is more about the heroic white liberal who doesn't understand slavery more than anything else.
Yeah.
In other words, that last act might be Twain very ingeniously capturing white abolitionists who wanted to do good but had no idea or understanding of the slave experience, but in a sense wanted to be heroized as these great saviors.
Yeah.
And that is what Toni Morrison seemed to be saying. But of course, I am only seeing one quote from her.
I read it so differently. I read it as part of the adventure and comedy, and this is what like kids do.
But I also did see the cruelty. In fact, I honestly, when I reread Huckleberry Finn, that last act with Tom Sawyer was such a slog for me. But when I saw what Toni Morrison was saying, I sort of thought about it a little differently, right? Now, she may not be right. We don't know. We can't get into Twain's head. I at least appreciated the way
Technically, you could, he's buried. You can get in there.
you can actually physically get in his head.
Yeah.
But I do feel like Toni Morrison has an interesting perspective on it.
And she is reacting to that general criticism also, that the third act is a failure. It's Twain selling out to what he thinks of as the tastes of his readers who need some more boys' adventure. So he's pandering. But Tony was, saying, no, there's more to it than that.
Yes, he's pandering, but this is also how people will buy the book because they want the boys' adventure, and then you're sneaking in this bigger message in there.
But
right?
it's markedly different than the adventure in Tom Sawyer.
Yeah.
Tom Sawyer, there's
Boys'
that big old adventure happening, but really it's because Tom's getting himself into trouble.
Right.
Whereas when he does it at the end of Huckleberry Finn, he's never in a position of danger. He's only sinking Jim further and further into a position of danger.
Right.
And so we don't feel as sympathetic or
No.
excited by Tom Sawyer's actions. That must have been a choice by Twain. And I feel like Toni Morrison might be closer aligned to what the origins of that choice, or the impulse of that choice, than maybe I was when I read it, just feeling, oh my God, if you cut the last third off this book, it'd be great.
To go back to the differences, in the original, we had the King and the Duke, but I don't think you had the blackface minstrels, right? That's
No.
only in James, right?
It's only in James.
Yeah.
And to me, like, I found myself just really confused about whether this was supposed to be a retelling of the Huckleberry Finn story, or, I mean, it's weird when you have essentially, you're changing the story. You're not just giving a different perspective. To me, this was very confusing. Once things start going in different directions, I was like, I don't know what I'm supposed to be thinking about this world anymore.
Let me throw this out there then. Just like Huckleberry Finn's third act seemed to be a departure, Percival Everett takes the same license, and in his third act, wrenches his story entirely away, just like Twain, in a way, wrenched his story in an entirely different direction. In his story, Jim becomes far more a direct agent of his own life and becomes this heroic character. Remember when we were talking about Claire and the Sun, and this idea of hero came up? And Tom, you were educating us about exactly what the classical understanding of a hero is. Well, I think that's Jim at the end of James. He's almost become Django Unchained, right?
Right.
He's come in and he's got his wife and his child, and he's leading this revolution.
And he's not code switching anymore.
No, he's not code switching anymore, and he's doing all this stuff. So I guess the question is, he has this adventure in which he's a hero, and in Huckleberry Finn, Tom Sawyer is trying to manufacture a story in which a hero happens. And so I'm wondering if those two do complement each other more than we think they do. But let me throw that out there. What do you think of that idea, that dynamic, that the third acts inherently are adventure stories?
I mean, here's a simpler way to think about it. That third act, when Tom Sawyer's there, is just not very interesting from James' perspective. He doesn't do anything. So if you're rewriting it from James' perspective, you either make it very short or you have to come up with a different adventure, because that third act is just supposed to be, I mean, that's the finale, that's the climax for everything. But it's very uninteresting if you make that climax from James's perspective, because he's just sitting there waiting. Even though I wasn't very happy with the third act at James either. It was my least favorite.
But you're making me like it better, Louis, because you're reminding me. It's been a couple of months, and I've read a lot of other things in between. But am I right that at the end of James, basically, he's going off to join the Union Army?
He's taking his wife and his daughter north. And yeah, I think there is this sense that now that he's saved his wife and daughter, he hasn't stopped his ascension. It's presaging a kind of
Yeah.
emergence into a
Yeah.
black hero.
Yeah, and it's not gonna be agency in the sense of a boy's adventure. I think he was, in that sense, maybe trying to trump Twain in the retrospective history that the Civil War is coming on, and his version of James, the philosopher hidden under the coon talk, is an agent of history. I liked the ending. I liked the idea that he brought in history and said, here's what my James would do. And he's not just me. This is what my ideal of James would have done. Huck can go ahead and light out for the territory and kill Indians, which is basically what his future would have been. Or he can go north, emancipate his family, and join the struggle.
That conflagration that happens, burning to the ground a representation of slavery, the imprisonment, right? Burning that down and having all these other former slaves kind of get together and I mean, I did like it. I wasn't sure how to think about it until I reread Huckleberry Finn.
Yeah.
And it was only then that I kind of got this sense of the adventure story that was going on, and I appreciated it a little bit more.
The other night down in Mexico with our friends, and we watched Get Out. As horror goes, this is the cleverest, funniest. It sends up so many cliches of bringing the boyfriend home to meet the parents and white liberalism. It was just astonishing. And it's a movie about the modernizing of slavery with contemporary technology.
Maybe Everett is coming from that tradition. Whatever Jordan Peele is doing, that's kind of what Everett is doing as well. They're kind of part of this. Let's appropriate this genre culture and let's turn them into Black stories.
Yeah.
And that's what Everett is doing and Jordan Peele continues to do,
Yeah.
right? So maybe we're looking at Everett a little too early in the emergence of this particular literary tradition. Again, in modern day and age, there is no such thing as an isolated literary tradition because it is immediately informed by
Whereas
media.
Toni Morrison, let's think of her as representing a certain stage of Black novel writing. She's not appropriating Jane Austen. She's got to have her own rapture. It can't exploit and be humorous about the cliches of domestic novel writing.
We hit the bigger themes I was hoping to get early, which is great.
I want to come back to farce at a certain point, too.
This might be a really good time to do it. Let me mention this real quick. White people's perspective. Let me just read what my note is. I noticed lots of scenes about confusion around ownership, slave etiquette, and relationships with slaves. They know what the barrier is, but there's a lot of confusion around it. There's a lot of confusion in Huckleberry Finn too about that. White people have mixed feelings about this a lot. Obviously, they're always the cruel ones, but oftentimes it's a confusion. So I assume that this was very much part of the historic antebellum South, especially if we're talking about people who own slaves closer to the northern border. Everybody's talking, everybody's mixing things up, everybody's having arguments and disagreements. And if you look about it very technically, that is property and I am an owner. It's not intrinsically that because this is a human being and I am another human being. That's always complicating almost all stories about slavery, I feel, outside of the just sheer cruelty. Because there are those characters just sheer cruelty, right? In fact, actually, this goes to Zola too. There are characters in Zola who are sheer cruelty as well, right? But I'm wondering if both Huckleberry Finn and James deal with this white confusion.
It's interesting you're calling it white confusion. I guess when I think about it historically, I'm assuming that there's just a huge range of complicated feelings that people have, not just people in the South, people in the North, about, race relations.
Totally.
And in the South, it's very easy to portray the evil characters. But so many examinations of slavery also show a lot of people that are somewhere in the middle and have what seem to be conflicting feelings about the whole thing. That whenever you have anything like slavery or really any kind of caste system, you always get these are people like me. There's always an empathy, but it's always also limited by what you're supposed to be like. And you see that in Huckleberry Finn a lot. He's trying to compare, right, the way he's feeling versus what he's told. And, there's a little bit of back and forth, even though he goes with what he feels.
The character of Huck also does that in James. And so my question, I guess, is if Huckleberry Finn is the embodiment of that confusion. that I'm talking about.
Yeah, Huck to me, the reason he's always been that he endures such a character is because he says, "Well, then I guess I'll have to go to hell." He's got all of the racist attitudes you could ask for, but there's a well of feeling in him that just can't tolerate what he's been taught. It's the obverse of the kind of white racism that Jordan Peele illustrates, where they're all saying, I would have voted for Obama for a third term. I want to emphasize that I'm not a racist. I love black folks. Some of my best friends are, etc. And Huck, no, Huck's not a phony hypocrite like that. It's feeling versus what he's been taught.
I think I finally figured out what I'm going for. Huckleberry Finn, whereas all of these other characters are wildly different in each of the stories, if they show up at all. The king and the duke, they're horrible in James. They're just criminals, right? Whereas
Yep.
there's a little bit more nuance to them in, I feel, Huckleberry Finn a little bit.
We're still horrible. I mean, they're the most despicable character. Maybe is Pop, might be the other one. The most despicable characters in here.
Yeah, but Huckleberry Finn, right? Is it the same Huckleberry Finn in each book? That's my question.
Partly.
I mean, you can't have a reformed James without a Huckleberry Finn to kind of match him a little bit. But I mean, for the most part, I felt that they were really similar.
Personal, friendship, the word friend, it does it, where they should not be friends. But what do you know? They actually care about each other.
Right, they're genuine about
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
And that's true in Huckleberry Finn. It's the thing that gets transferred into James.
But at the end of Huckleberry Finn, you understand that they could possibly continue to be friends. But at the end of James, these two go completely separate ways and they never have any sort of moment of goodbye.
Right. Yeah.
I think this is partly the personality of Huckleberry Finn. He's a kid. James is a grown-up. This is like, kids don't think that way.
You got to go read Leslie Fiedler. Leslie Fiedler was the first to raise the question, what kind of friendship is this? It's an essay called Come Back to the Raft, Huck, Honey. He's the one who suggested that this is a story about gay love. He was a very eminent professor at University of Buffalo. And I remember when he proposed this, everybody said, no, we absolutely reject it. And he said it's more than friendship. It's man-boy love. And of course, he was projecting some things.
Well, I'm sure he was. What's the name of the essay? Come Back to the Raft?
Huck, Honey.
I do want to look this up and try to read it. I don't know if I entirely believe it. And I think it undermines what I think is the one genuine thing about both of these novels. This real sincere friendship between these two, that Huck wants the best for Jim and Jim wants the best for Huck.
But it's not just that. I mean, to me, yeah, friendship is not even quite right to me. Especially in James. James is protective of Huck. James is being kind of the responsible adult looking out for this poor kid, and Huck reciprocates. And obviously, the equality here, since Huck is white, compensates for some degree for his age. But a friendship like that would be limited.
Let me bring it into the space that Percival Everett brings it into. Percival Everett is also thinking about that relationship and why Jim is so committed to Huck and everything. And then he just goes, fine, let's make James Huck's dad. James says that, and Huck is thrown by it for a second. Doesn't change the course of the story at all.
I thought that was such a bizarre twist.
I thought it was bizarre too. And as you notice, it hasn't come up yet in this conversation. But since now we're in a discussion about the relationship between Huck and James, I don't think that could go any further without us bringing that in. Percival Everett basically says, yeah, this is a very genuine relationship, and James cares very deeply about Huckleberry Finn.
Yeah.
This is a father-son relationship.
And here's what Fiedler did. I want to quote something. We are accustomed to find in the world's great novels some heterosexual passion. We come instead on the fugitive slave and the no-account boy lying side by side on a raft, or the pariah sailor waking in the tattooed arms of the brown harpooner on the verge of their impossible quest. So Queequeg, Melville came into it. Fiedler was one of the great master critics of American literature, and he just exposed this thread that nobody had ever discerned. I think that that's what Percy Everett is evoking as well when he suggests that miscegenation is the backstory of this, that Huck is actually James's son.
Let's kind of get a definitive opinion on it. What'd you think?
I thought it was unnecessary. I think it's actually a lot less interesting with him being the actual dad versus him having a complex of feeling towards a young white boy alone in the world without a dad or with a terrible dad.
Yeah, and Fiedler then turns it into man-boy love.
I would say that, Shlomo, if in the book he's doing other things that were more interesting relationships, but Percival Everett's not writing a book about relationship. He's writing a book about James. And in James's mind, sure, he's the father of Huckleberry Finn. In other words, it is almost part of that farcical tapestry. I would agree with you that it was a more interesting relationship if Percival Everett was interested in crafting a lot of more interesting relationships.
Mhm.
But he's not, even with Huckleberry Finn.
That kind of relationship would work with I'm Not Sidney Poitier, or Dr. No. James is not a farce.
But that aspect of it definitely steps into that terrain. It almost seems ridiculous.
Or he just wrote something that he meant to be serious that is not working. That's how I read it. Something, he meant to be serious that's really just not working. But that might be my shortcoming as a reader too.
It might be I had no idea how to take it. And then the book continued without it mattering.
Also, this idea of the book continuing without it mattering seems like a really, really, really big deal.
But he threw it in there knowing he threw a grenade in the room.
Mhm.
Readers are going to read that and go, oh, and it's going to be talked about when people write about the book. They're going to talk about this like father-son relationship. He knew it was a grenade, and yet it has very little impact on the book itself.
Yeah.
Either I'm impressed by that decision or utterly confused by that.
I don't know. Maybe the speed in which he writes these things leads to more imperfections. I don't know. Wasn't a fan of it.
So using that to get back to farce, Tom, what do you want to say about farce?
I've just looked up the definition. A comic dramatic work using buffoonery and horseplay, typically including crude characterization and ludicrously improbable situations. So related to slapstick comedy, broad comedy, burlesque, vaudeville. In that sense, the Duke and the King are, performers of farce, of slapstick within the novel. But to go to the larger way, what does it mean to narrate farce? Treat it as a novelistic genre. And if I could have a conversation with Percy Everett, the first thing I would ask him was, what do you think of Lawrence Sterne, great 18th century writer who wrote a book called Tristram Shandy? It uses the same formula, the one wisecrack, but it does it with something, I think Everett's way of doing it is more with verbal tricks, negation, no, the name, I am not Sidney. It's a verbal trick. What Sterne did, and maybe Everett has tried to do this, Sterne does it with the nature of narrative itself. He asks the question, how can you write about your life? And he wants to take that literally. He goes back to the question of epic narrative. There were rules about the epic. You always begin the epic in the middle of the action, in medias res. Arms and the Man I Sing, and you're there on the battlefield. Milton in Paradise Lost, you're in the middle of the war in heaven. He says, no, I'm going to begin my narrative ab ovum, from the moment, not of my birth, but the moment of my conception. And so he starts with, he says, I wish my mother had been more thoughtful when I was conceived, because at the critical moment, he doesn't use the word orgasm, at the critical moment of my conception, she has said, dear, did you remember to wind the clock? Coitus interruptus occurs. And so his conception is flawed. And he's a damaged person from the ab ovum, from the beginning. And Sterne, he just milks that joke. And then the longer it goes on, he realizes my life is going on faster than I can write it. Because, of course, I said I did not want to leave anything out. I'm going to be absolutely faithful to tell you the truth about everything. So he's falling behind constantly. His novel is deconstructing itself. And he makes that joke hilarious throughout and taking in all of contemporary philosophy. So I bet you Percy Everett, that Sterne may be his master, his inspirer, because it's about self-reflexive fiction and farce, but serious farce. What is the key of farce in narrative itself? And this is a reason I thought of it was because I'm Not Sidney Poitier is about the birth of the narrator. When I read that, I burst out laughing. My mother, she had a hysterical pregnancy for 3-4 years, and then I came out. Come on, now that is a really good joke. It's a much better joke than Dr. No. It's a deeper joke.
Also, he gets more praise for I Am Not Sidney Poitier than he does for Dr. No.
Dr. No is really a one-trick pony. I'm Not Sidney Poitier has all that stuff, exploring racism and the comparison to Sidney Poitier, and there's so much more.
I like this idea of being conscious of the narrative and the narrative structure, because that is something that drives Percival Everett. Being aware of maybe not the narrative structure, but pop culture understandings
Mhm.
that are in place that he's subverting, right? I'm Not
Mhm.
Sidney Poitier, and even Dr. No, and even in James, because if you look at Huckleberry Finn as something that has persisted and in some way is part of pop culture simply because every child reads it in school, it's part of our pop consciousness as opposed
Mhm.
to a deep cut of Twain. So, in a way, Everett is playing with our understanding of not narrative structure, but pop culture perception of things to craft his stories. It's very easy to get annoyed by it sometimes if we're looking for something more.
In Dr. No, every turn, there's a new assassination or somebody drops through the floor and
Yeah.
somebody is shot in cold blood who has, up to that point, you thought, well, he's Sill's accessory, or it's kind of like a bad parody of James Bond novels.
Yeah, but he makes the evil billionaire black,
Black, right.
and
But
he
that's part of the
makes
parody.
his ultimate mission, his ultimate desire is to build up his black brothers and sisters. And the billionaire's plan is something that we would go, well, I mean, I guess that's good because
Yeah.
that is the resistance against a white culture that
Mhm.
has continually for thousands of years now worked against black.
I scarcely, maybe it was just because I've been reading lots of other stuff, but I scarcely realized that the villain was black.
To me, it was a huge deal. Number one, you have an eminent black professor of math. That is our hero. I believe that was the first book I've read that had like a weirdo black professor as the protagonist. But then that the evil supervillain is a black billionaire and totally eccentric and has an assistant with like an afro, and he's playing on all that stuff. And to me, that was the thing that was making it really different. He's doing the like 60s or 70s James Bond type thing, but he's doing it, with black people instead, being the ones in power. At the end of the day, Lewis, this thing with like pop culture, here I think we're talking about the films of the late 60s, 1970s. And I'm Not Sidney Poitier is also, right? Huckleberry Finn, pop culture, sort of. These are things that like older people and scholars would really know.
Not necessarily, because Huckleberry Finn is still very much in the curriculum.
To an extent, I mean, it's so
Yeah.
controversial now in so many places that they've replaced it with other things. So
Yeah.
I don't think it's as common as you think it is.
I guess the comment is that, yeah, for Percival Everett, everything he's playing with is a play off of pop culture. But from Percival Everett's perspective,
Hmm.
which is 60s and 70s spy films and Huckleberry Finn, because it's something he probably encounters all the time in discussions about representations of Black people within novels.
And in Erasure, this would be also the way society takes things like gangster rap, want to celebrate its authenticity, in some sort of a positive way. It was weird that with American fiction, when I saw the movie, I was like, this just doesn't feel like it's in the right time period. And then when I found out it was based on Erasure, which is, like, because it felt like the 90s. It felt like the 90s was when this stuff was going on.
Have you ever seen a film called Guess Who's Coming to Dinner?
Oh, yeah, yeah. And that's in I'm Not Sidney Poitier.
And the scene when I think it's the girlfriend's mother comes into the bedroom and Sidney Poitier is getting dressed and he's got pants on and he has his undershirt on. And she comes in and he reaches into the closet. He pulls the shirt out to cover up his bare shoulders because the black body can't be. I'm trying to think back to when that film came along and Sidney Poitier became an icon of the black man you would bring home to dinner. And it was so anachronistic very rapidly. In the 60s, it almost ruined Sidney Poitier. He was the acceptable black man.
And that's kind of what almost all of his films are about. The catalyst for the story is that he's Black.
And we're going to do it respectfully.
And one answer to this is blaxploitation. Shaft.
I mean, I love Sidney Poitier films, and I love Sidney Poitier as an actor, and I love that he does subvert white expectations of Black men. And actually, I think in this very similar way, Percival Everett does as well. And he doesn't talk about Black revolutionary themes with a fist in the air. Many other Black performers and writers and icons who are just living their life, but by their very presence of doing it, they are advancing the cause of the Black community.
Since I've been mainly kind of being a little nitpicking with Percy Everett, one thing I like about him, if you put him from the angle of the academic novel, and this comes back to Shlomo, your observation, why does this guy have to be a professor of literature at USC? When does he have time? And he makes plenty of money writing these best-selling
That's
novels.
right. Yeah, I asked that. I didn't ask it on the show. I've asked this before. Yeah, why does he bother teaching? Like he's a very good writer. Like he seems to be able to make his living that way.
If you think of these as academic novels about professors, let's face it, James is a professor. He doesn't have a PhD. And Dr. No, he is a professor. And he is clearly a very bad professor. I mean, I love his renderings of office hours where students, earnest young students come in wanting to be taken seriously and everything. And, yes, I have nothing to say to you. I can't teach you anything. It's like he loves the old Socratic joke that Socrates is the teacher who teaches nothing and who knows nothing. Part of the most pleasurable thing is the fun he has with the role of the professor as authority.
Right.
He's really good at making fun of it.
Especially as himself in I'm Not Sidney Poitier.
Yeah. Well,
Like right when Not Sidney goes to Percival, Professor Everett's office hours, and they're always a complete bizarre non sequitur waste of time. And the course that Everett teaches is a course in the philosophy of nonsense. And the entire thing is like, is this bullshit or is this not bullshit?
office hours as farce.
The popularity of Percival Everett in this kind of like national bestseller, lots of books being sold is a new thing. I think it probably started because of American fiction.
Really?
They were bestsellers, but you don't have to be huge to be a bestseller. American fiction probably catapulted him into this more popular novelist, right?
Right,
And so James could be looked at something extremely calculated because it's a book that's almost tailor-made
Yeah.
to invite controversy and discussion.
And attention.
It's a response to a book that is already very controversial at a time in which, race politics, I kind of feel, is at a fever pitch in this day and age. And I feel like James is kind of the right book at the right time from the right author. And I don't know how much of that was a calculation versus how much of it was literally him following his interests. And if it is more calculated, is the ending of James then also a response to what race politics is right now?
In today's paper, the New York Times, if we're thinking of now, one of the lead stories, the front page, Democrats struggling with what are they going to do? And of course, the wise elders are saying, we've got to de-emphasize this race business.
Number one, I'm definitely like one of those people who do think that the Democrats did very badly in focusing too much on race and trans issues. When it comes to James, when you guys talk about the farce too, with people who are just directly tackling more race issues, I don't know if I got a whole lot. I mean, I enjoyed the book from the
Yeah.
book about, these race issues, maybe because so much of it was just comedic. But, it didn't make me think as much as like reading The Underground Railroad.
Or even something like Kindred. And again, there's no real hero story there either. There's a reluctant person who's been thrown into this science fiction loop.
Kindred's a really great example of this. There's a book that really is great at making you think about these things, putting you in place.
I think that was my initial question. Is Percival Everett, and actually it's unfair to say this, I'm going to say the bold version, of course there are nuances, but is he making us think about these things in a dynamic way? I use the word dynamic way too much. Whereas Kindred, of course, that was also written in 1976.
So it's a different era.
And the thing is, most of her science fiction is actually more traditional science fiction. Kindred is a departure.
Feminist sci-fi, Ursula Le Guin, Octavia Butler, those women were my heroes. And then here's another book I think you can read today.
James Baldwin?
Baldwin has collected essays. They're as lively and sharp as they ever were.
Let's look at the ending of James. It's only like in the last like 30 pages or so that he goes from the end of the 2 steps forward, 1 step back, kind of getting out of the mire of slavery to leading a revolution
Mhm.
and ascending, rapid fire ascending into someone who probably will be almost a folkloric hero. What does that say about, I guess, the current moment? Or like I don't want Percival Everett not to write that ending. I was with him on that ending. Oh my God, not only did he get out of slavery, now he's gonna be this hero. Does that undermine anything? Is it part of the farcical nature of the book?
That's not farce, I think. No, I think your question is right on the money, though. Maybe it suggests, since most of his endings, at least in the 3 novels I've read, are good joke. Okay, thank you very much. Curtain closes. This one, it connects with history for one thing in a rather different way.
Definitely what you're getting in the book is not that now he's free. He can't be free if his family's not free. His family can't be free if the nation doesn't change itself. And so to me, it's just putting him on the long road to freedom.
That he necessarily has to now join this struggle.
Yeah, I mean, when he saves people, he's heroic and all that, but I didn't see the way forward as a glorious kind of way forward. I saw it as a way just kind of the ambiguous future that is unforeseen and is most likely to fail.
Historically, it doesn't. He meets Union soldiers on the road north. He connects with those Union soldiers who we know ultimately win the Civil War. So it's not doomed to failure. He is going to win this.
Again, it's a long, long road. The Union soldiers, oh, you mean the good races?
We're only talking about the direction that Percival Everett's facing when the novel ends. The direction that he's facing is we finally meet Union soldiers who are now actively pushing back against the very institution that we just spent the whole book mired in. The connection to history is interesting too, because when I reread Huckleberry Finn, I noticed that there's kind of no mention of the impending war. Mark Twain wrote Huckleberry Finn after the Civil War, but he didn't sprinkle in allusions to an inevitable conflict or confrontation.
I have this special relation to Mark Twain because he came to Nevada and he founded a newspaper called the Nevada Appeal, which was the first newspaper. Carson City became the capital of Nevada, tiny capital, 5,000 people. I delivered the newspaper. The Nevada Appeal had a slogan from Mark Twain, founding editor Mark Twain. Huck is his story. Twain was like maybe the first author I ever read. I could recite Tom Sawyer by heart, and I tried to imitate. I tried to run away. I made a raft, and we went on the Truckee River and almost drowned if the sheriff of Carson City hadn't rescued us.
But the one thing that we didn't actually cover was the minstrel tradition. It's not in Huckleberry Finn, and it is here in a big way, and it's complicated by a lot of things. The guy that buys him and frees him is not a good man himself.
No.
That's that kind of like white confusion that I'm talking about. He behaves this way, but then he thinks this way, and he's doing this thing. But let's look at the minstrel tradition only because I know that because of Bamboozled, Tom, you did plunge into this.
It's a brilliant film, and it is a farce. It makes up a completely ludicrous and improbable story that starts funny and ends horribly, takes you right through the whole trajectory of the ambivalence about blackface and minstrelsy and how black folks have a love-hate relationship. Only somebody like Spike Lee could make this because he knows this material and loves and hates it. You've got to take it into account. It's evil, but there has to be some kind of a ritual of disenchantment to make it possible to come to terms with it. And I'm just an iconologist here. I like to talk about images and what the pictures want and how do images come alive and how do they get into our heads and all this stuff. So Bamboozle seemed to me, I've got to write about this.
Through the lens of you tackling Bamboozled as a subject, what's your hot take, I guess, just your initial take on the way that Percival Everett depicts it in James.
I like that part of the one thing Spike Lee does, Percy Everett is imitating, is the pain of blackface, the physical. It's horrible to get it off. When Everett described that as just don't get any in your eyes, all of that, I love that. I thought, here Percy Everett's getting to the nitty-gritty.
This was my favorite part of the book. For me, it was just fun. Besides all the stuff that you can get from it, I just thought it was funny and fun.
I like the revivalist preacher too. In Huckleberry Finn, James is not there. He's not at that revival meeting, but Percival Everett puts him there. But the reason the minstrel thing kind of came up, sure point, I love the pain of it. I also love them marching through town and drumming up business. They're kind of a more legitimate form of entertainment than what the Duke and the King are doing with trying to just rob people, basically. But it was the idea that there is a black person pretending to be in blackface to do this minstrel tradition, which is the thing that Bamboozle's about. Is Percival Everett commenting on that? I can't imagine anybody reading that scene and not thinking of Bamboozled.
It says something about this country particularly, I think.
Percival Everett is writing this novel that touches on race relations in the United States and is read and being talked about. Is it part of that conversation?
Mm-hmm.
Like, is James part of the conversation we're talking about here politically? Because, is part of that him becoming the hero in the end I don't know, like a rally cry? I don't know.
This is the question, right now everybody's asking themselves, well, what can I do? I can talk all night. I can make speeches all night. I can show up at a demonstration. I can give money. And I can continue to write and think.
I hope a lot of these political themes that we're talking about right now at the end of James here are going to carry over our discussion about Germinal, because obviously you guys are going to be able to teach me a lot about philosophical thinking as it relates to political thinking, as it relates to realist writers like Zola, who are basically depicting poverty and what that drives people to do. And I'm reading L'Assommoir right now, and it's all about alcoholism, but it's also about the impossibility of rising out of class. So as we get deeper into Zola, I would like a lot of these themes to be discussed, especially because we could see them outside of the context of Trump, where we can't read Percival Everett and not read it outside the context of Trump, because Trump has been around while Percival Everett has done all this kind of stuff. And so I feel like it's going to be interesting to look at Zola like that. So I'd like to propose that Germinal is soon in this.
Yeah,
And so I'll reread it. I have it around on my shelf there. I'll reread it.
It was my first Zola, so it's like the lowest sediment. It's appropriate that it's about mining.
Yes, that's true. And that ends our discussion. I hope you got something out of that, whether you have read James or not. If anything, I hope it encourages you to read more. As I've mentioned before on this show, though I have read novels all my life, it is only in the last 10 years I have really made them my primary media format. And it has really transformed my life. Today I was reading Maurice by E.M. Forster, which will be featured in a future episode. And I ran across a passage that I feel for me sums up why I think reading is important. So in the book, we meet briefly a grandfather who lived his life as a hard-nosed businessman, and he retires. And E.M. Forster describes what happens after retirement. Throughout life, he had been the ordinary businessman, hard and touchy. But he retired not too late, and with surprising results. He took to reading, and though the direct effects were grotesque, a softness was generated that transformed his character. The opinions of others, once to be contradicted or ignored, appeared worthy of note, and their desires worth humoring. So yeah, I think reading opens us up, not just intellectually, but emotionally, socially. It makes us all a little less hard-nosed, a little less touchy, a little more understanding and accepting, whether we are thinking about it or not. Again, thank you for joining me for my midlife crisis. Check the description below for links to the books and essays we mentioned in this episode. And please drop in again for another book soon. Moby Dick is a gay story. The relationship between Ishmael and Queequeg, I mean, the beginning when they share a room together. But we should definitely talk about Melville at some point too. Bartleby the Scrivener, Billy Budd. The Confidence Man that you recommended. I'm also trying to read. Melville has so many other things outside of Moby Dick that would be
Yeah.
so interesting to delve into. I'd like to do that.
And don't forget Melville's epic poem, Clarel. Clarel is his journey to the Holy Land, and it's a poem 4 times as long as Moby Dick, with epic descriptions of Palestine.
He either writes a small, easily digestible novel like Bartleby the Scrivener or Billy Budd, or
Nobody except, I mean, there may be 2 or 3 Melville scholars out there who have read Clarel and couldn't make it.